This lecture is about getting help. This lecture applies both to this course that you're taking right now, the Data Scientist Toolbox, but also to all of the other courses you're going to be taking in the course track. So keep in mind that in a standard class you may have taken, in a class of 30 or 100 people, you would raise your hand and ask a question, and then you'd be able to immediately get feedback from your instructor. But in a class like this, in a massive online open class, there could be up to 100,000 people taking the class, and what you're going to do instead is post your questions to the message board, and then hopefully your fellow students will upvote them if they're good questions, and your instructor will try to respond to as many as possible, but probably more often than that, your peers or community TAs will be responding. And so there are three of us that are teaching these 9 classes, and we're going to try to put in as much time as we can to answer your questions, but obviously that's a limited resource. And so relying on your fellow peers and your community TAs, we've found, is a great way to get involved. We've also learned that the community that's built around the message boards and the massive online open courses is amazing, and it's probably the best learning part of the entire experience. And so hopefully you'll get involved and you'll be an active participant in those message boards. It's very clear that the fastest answer is often the one that you find for yourself. So to try to answer your questions yourself, you should try to look it up on Google or look it up on Stack Overflow. If you ask a question that's very simple to Google, you'll often get a response that says Google it or read the documentation, which is not the easiest way to get the answer that you're going for. An important part of being an active participant in the community environment here is to, if you figure out an answer to a question, is to post it to the message board. If you're struggling with a particular part or structure or idea or R programming exercise, it's almost a sure bet that there's a lot of other people that are struggling with the same thing. And so they'll really appreciate it if you take the time to post to the message board the way that you figured out how to solve that problem. So I thought I'd mention just a few important R functions that will help you to find answers for some of the questions that you might have. So when you have an R function, we'll talk a little bit about R more later in the class. You can actually type several different ways you can type to get the help file for that function. So one example is that you can type like this. You can type $rnorm, and that will tell you what the help file is for the function rnorm. You can also search like this, help.search. And if you use help.search, you might not even necessarily have to get the function name exactly right. It'll still search through the help files and try to find things for you. And then if you want to get the arguments for a function, you can use the command args like this, args of rnorm, and it'll tell you the function arguments. These functions are very useful if your goal is to try to figure out how R is working for a particular function, but might not be so useful if you want to understand the sort of underlying concepts involved in those functions. So another thing that you might want to do is actually look a little bit deeper into the code. And so if you wanted to do that, you can actually just type the function name without any brackets, and it'll actually reproduce the entire code for you. And so what you see here is if I type rnorm like this, then what I end up getting out on the R console is actually this right here. I get out sort of all the code that corresponds to that function. You can also see this link here to a reference card with a lot of helpful R functions. So an important point that you'll run into a lot in this class is how to ask an R question. And so there are a few different components of it that you should keep in mind. First is you will want to outline what are the steps that you have executed in order to create this problem. So if you ran 3 functions in order, you should reproduce what those 3 functions are. And then you should say what you expect the output to be, and then what you saw instead. So I expected it to give me the answer to this question, and instead it gave me an error. And so a really important thing to keep in mind is that R packages and R and all these other tools that we're going to be telling you about are going to be evolving over time. And so it's really important that you tell the version of the product that you're using, so the version of the package, the version of R that you're using, and then what operating system you're working on, whether you're on Mac or Linux or Windows. When you're asking a data analysis question, there's a similar set of things that you need to report. So first is, what is the question you're trying to answer? You're saying, I'm trying to relate variable y to variable x. And then what steps or tools did you use to answer it? This may be a combination of R tools and outside tools and maybe some intuition. And then you, again, need to report what you expected to see. I expected to be able to tell the relationship between them, and what do I see instead? I see, oh, I don't know, I see some crazy scatter plot, and I don't know what that means. And so an important thing to keep in mind here too is what other solutions you might have thought about. So sometimes you've run through 3 or 4 different things to try to get the right answer. And so if you report what you've tried, all the different things you've tried, then when people try to answer your question, they can go directly to something that you haven't tried. So an important point of asking questions in a highly massive class like this is to make sure that you're very specific in the titles of the questions that you're using on the message board. So some examples of bad titles are things like this. So if you say, help, I can't fit a linear model, then you're not exactly giving a lot of detail as to what exactly your problem is or how it can be addressed. So a better a question to ask is sort of saying, okay, I have this function and it's happening in that version of R 2.15, and here's the error that's being produced. It's a seg fault that's being produced, and it's only being produced when I have a large data set. And here's the software that I'm using. I'm using Mac OS 10.6.3. An even better question is to use a title that's a little bit more succinct. So here you lead off with, again, the function that you're asking about. You say, okay, I'm asking about R 2.15, and again, it's on this operating system. And then I very succinctly describe seg fault on large data frame. So by focusing on the very specific details, it means people can jump very quickly to the answers that you might need. So there's similar sorts of specific details that you would want to give when asking questions about data analysis problems. So in general, the more specific you are, the faster your answer will come. So there's some etiquette that we would like to encourage in terms of using these forums, or in just using help sites in general, not necessarily the ones in these forums. So again, describe the goal that you have of what's the question you're trying to answer. Be very explicit. Try to provide the minimum amount of information. If you provide way too much information, it's very hard for people to filter through and figure out what the real problem is. Being polite never hurt anybody and will often get your answer more quickly. And then follow up and post solutions. So if you post a question and somebody ends up giving you the answer on Stack Overflow instead of on the course website, it's the polite thing to do to post the answer that you found to the course website so that people can search it and find that answer as well. Please use the forums rather than using personal emails. We are very excited about trying to help you learn about data science, but it's very easy to overwhelm the inboxes of your instructors or community TAs if you all start sending emails simultaneously. When there's a typo in an assignment, please report it on the forums and we will address it as fast as we possibly can. Some things that you shouldn't necessarily do are immediately assume you found a bug in a major program. So saying you found a bug in R and that's why things aren't working. Groveling as a substitute for your work is obviously not a great thing. So begging other people to do your work for you. Please don't post homework questions on mailing lists or on the course forums. If you post the questions or the answers on the forums, it sort of takes away from the experience of everybody else. Please don't email a lot of different lists all simultaneously. Try to figure out what the right mailing list is and only email that. And then generally, you don't want to ask general data analysis questions on our forums. Those are often redirected back to courses, so try to keep those to our course forums, where hopefully there'll be a big group of interested people all trying to answer the same questions. So the credits for these slides go to Roger Ping, who's another instructor in the course track. He has these Getting Help videos. That's a link to his video on YouTube. And it was inspired by Eric Raymond's lecture, How to Ask Questions a Smart Way.